Hey guys, I'm Joe, and welcome back to my series of newer Star Wars reviews. For those of you who are new to my channel, I've started a new series of reviews where I'm covering the newer Star Wars films from 2015 to the present day. I've already talked about The Force Awakens. You could go check that out. I'll put the link in the description below for you. Today, we're going to talk about Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Now, I reviewed this back 3 years ago. It was almost 3 years ago when it was released. I think I had a somewhat iffy feeling on it. I said I enjoyed it, but there were things in there that I thought, I don't know about that. And I watched it again the other night, for the first time since seeing it a second time in theaters. Upon rewatch, I don't think it's that good. Is it a bad movie? No, I wouldn't say that, but it's not that good either.
You're a complete and total moron. How could you say that?
Ho. Hold your horses, okay? I'm gonna explain why.
Let me give it to you straight, buddy boy. Rogue One is a million times better than—
Shut up! These fanboys are gonna drive me out of my mind. So what is Rogue One about? If you remember the opening crawl from A New Hope, it's basically telling the story of how a group of rebel spies, or soldiers if you will, stole the plans to the Death Star and got it to the Rebel Alliance. And when I first heard that they were making that, I thought, oh, that's a cool idea. I like to see how they did that. It could be like a heist film and a war film combined into one. Gareth Edwards, the guy who did the 2014 Godzilla movie, that's a cool idea. He's good at making a huge grand scope of everything. I think it would fit really well with Star Wars. And I like the idea of seeing different characters in another side of Star Wars that we didn't really get in the films up until this point, like the Galactic Civil War. And we definitely get some of that stuff. And as I said earlier, I did fairly enjoy it at the time when it came out, but I knew I didn't like it quite as much as The Force Awakens.
Ooh, no surprise, you J.J. Abrams fanboy. You praise and love—
Shut up! I apologize. These Star Wars fans, they have really big egos, so just bear with me here. So I watched it the other night to prepare for this review, and I think it's okay. It's not a terrible movie, but in my estimation, it's not that good. From a production design and visual standpoint, I think this movie is just about flawless, minus one aspect which we'll talk about soon. The characters, however, are not that interesting. They're very underwritten and very flat. By the end of the movie, I don't really care about any of them dying. So the movie opens up in a very unusual fashion where it shows a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, but no opening crawl, trying to make an emphasis on this is a different type of Star Wars movie that you're about to see. And I like the idea of not seeing an opening crawl in a spin-off movie. It shows this married couple with their young daughter living on this planet somewhere off in the Outer Rim, and they get a visit from this Imperial officer and his elite guard, director Orson Krennic, played by Bill Mendelsohn. The man in charge of the home, Galen Erso, played by Mads Mikkelsen, turns out to be a former member of the Galactic Empire, if I remember correctly, and he's forcibly called back by Director Krennic to help build the new space station that the Emperor's secretly planning, known as the Death Star. But then his wife shows up out of nowhere and she ends up getting shot by the Imperial guards. Galen gets captured and the young girl, Jyn Erso, Galen's daughter, takes off and goes off to hide. And then Saw Gerrera, Forrest Whitaker, shows up and takes her under his wing. And then it cuts to 20-something years later, right before the events of A New Hope start to happen. And that's really where the problems with this movie begin. We see Jyn Erso being held prisoner by the Galactic Empire, but then a group of rebel soldiers come on board and they take her to the rebel base on Yavin 4. Meanwhile, we get introduced to some of the other characters like Captain Cassian Andor, played by Diego Luna, or Bodhi, played by Riz Ahmed. Riz Ahmed is on this other planet trying to get information to Saw Gerrera, and Captain Cassian Andor is about to meet up with an informant who tells him about the Death Star. It's really cool seeing different planets and whatnot, but the thing is, we don't really see enough of that stuff. Bounce from one planet to another, over here, over there, over here, over that, over here, over there. Sometimes it's a little jarring. Again, I like the idea of seeing different planets, but they bounce from one place to another so quickly that there's not enough time to digest what we're seeing. So at the rebel base, Jyn Erso is being questioned by the rebel leaders, and that they're actually looking for her father in order to figure out what exactly is going on with this Death Star that they're hearing about. And then we later go to this place called Jeddah, or the city of Jeddah, where Saw Gerrera is hanging out. Cassian and Jyn and K2SO are exploring the city trying to find Saw Gerrera, and they run into two other characters, Baze and Chirrut Îmwe, these two guardians of the Force Temple on the city of Jeddah. I don't know what exactly was going on there. Chirrut Îmwe, played by Donnie Yen, shows that he's a very formidable force to be reckoned with when he takes out all these stormtroopers in a samurai kind of style, and his partner Baze, who carries a big gun, kind of a quiet guy but a protective brother type of bond, and they do add some kind of levity to the movie.
You almost shot me.
You're welcome.
And then of course there's the line,
I want to force the forces with me. I want to force the forces with me.
that line's certainly gonna stick for years to come. But they get taken prisoner by Saw Gerrera's guys, and Jyn Erso has a meeting with Saw Gerrera. That's probably my biggest issue with this movie, is the characterizations. They're not that well fleshed out. They're really boring and not all that interesting, and we don't really know that much about them. The only characters that I think are fairly well realized are Chirrut and Baze. The movie implies an interesting backstory between the two, where Chirrut talks about, "Don't worry, Captain, I've been held in worse places than this." But that's really all we're told. We don't really know much else about them. And the thing with Bodhi, alls we know, really, is that he's a pilot. They constantly say that throughout this movie. "I'm the pilot. Are you the pilot? Are you the pilot? I'm the pilot. Yeah, I'm the pilot. I'm the pilot." And there's also little hints of that there was some kind of a special bond with Bodhi and Galen Erso, but we don't know exactly what it is. There's no other things that show you or tell you why exactly are we meant to care about this situation. And Jyn Erso, we get hints of some kind of a backstory between her and Saw Gerrera, and how she was abandoned by Saw Gerrera for being too unruly. And that time jump does not really help either, because had they slowed down and focused on Jyn Erso, maybe kind of in a similar fashion to Bruce Wayne being trained by the League of Shadows in Batman Begins, then I think there would have been some emotional weight to that storyline. And also, it doesn't really help that she does basically the same kind of expressive face the entire time. Blank kind of stare. Yes, she does get more hopeful by the end of the movie, because after that scene where she sees the hologram message from her father, the very next scene she goes back to the same old kind of look that we saw her do for the first half of the movie. And Captain Cassian Andor, he is not that interesting. When we first meet him and he shoots that informant who tells him about the Death Star, it makes you go, "Oh, okay. So this guy's not exactly squeaky clean." And then after he meets Jyn Erso and gets sent on the mission to find Galen, he's told by his commanding officer, "Kill him if you have to," which this movie does try to touch on the whole doing some unforgivable things for the cause. And that's the kind of question that you would expect in a movie like this, especially in the middle of a war zone. But that plotline doesn't go anywhere. It's barely touched on because of his loyalty to Jyn Erso. When he finally has a chance to shoot Galen from a distance with his sniper rifle, he freezes and he decides not to because... reasons? I don't know. They don't really go into it. And with a common thing that we see with these characters is a hint of what they've been through. After she lashes out at him verbally for saying, "You were gonna kill my father. Listen, I've been in this fight since I was 6 years old. You're not the only one who's lost everything. Some of us just decided to do something about it." And that's all we get. Just because you say it doesn't make it so. And we don't really get a good sense of camaraderie with these characters either. This is a group of people that's supposed to go on this dangerous mission and get themselves killed in order to protect the greater good and get the plans out to the Rebel Alliance. Now, a common counter-argument that I hear for this is that the characters were written weak on purpose. You weren't supposed to care about them. That's why it didn't have much impact.
That is literally the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
That should give you more of a reason to care about them. What really should have been done is this. Maybe not show the backstory of Jyn Erso's mother getting killed and so on. Maybe show like a flashback or two of that where she talks about what she's experienced, and maybe a couple of flashbacks of her with Galen Erso as they're going through certain situations, and that gives you a reason to care. They're in the middle of this dangerous situation, and then they're called back to Rebel headquarters where they're told about a Death Star. Then they're given the mission to find Galen Erso, and they're questioning, "Wait a minute, that was your father. He was with the Empire. Why should we go out of our way to help your father who's on the other side?" And at the same time, you see those different character dynamics. What does that remind you of? Saving Private Ryan. Or with the first time we meet those guys, when they land on the beach of Normandy, and as they go on their mission to find Private Ryan, you get to see those different character dynamics and the sense of camaraderie that they have with each other. And as the film goes on, you learn something interesting about them, like Wade with his mother, or Private Ryan having a moment of awkwardness with his neighbor, or Ryan himself, when he talks about a funny story with his brothers before they left for basic training, that by the time the movie's over and when most of them don't make it, that makes it all the more impactful because of how much you care about these characters. Rogue One, the characters being written weak on purpose? That is the stupidest excuse I've ever heard.
Certainly a lot more that I could say for that Mary Sue character in Anakin Skywalker 2.0 in The Force Awakens.
Shut up! Shut up!
I apologize for that tirade. I don't want to sound like a self-entitled jerk-off or whatever that we usually see on YouTube anyway. But it drives me crazy when I see people give this movie a pass for the characters being poorly written, and yet they have a problem with the characters in The Force Awakens, because those characters I thought were actually so well fleshed out in that movie alone, at least. I mean, we'll talk about The Last Jedi, but The Force Awakens I thought had a good handle on the characterizations and the story. That's not the only negatives I have with this one. Certain characters show up from the other films. Since this is set during the original trilogy timeline, it's not really surprising to me because I kind of expected that to happen. I mean, we all saw Mon Mothma in the trailers. I didn't mind her being in there because many Bothans died to bring us this information. And then there's other people that show up, like the general who gave the briefing to the Death Star attack in A New Hope. Red Leader, this is Base 1. Keep half your group out of range for the next run. And then another character shows up from the prequel trilogy, Bail Organa, played by Jimmy Smits, who returns from the prequel trilogy also. And it's nice to see that bridging the gap between the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy with this one, and how he subtly references Obi-Wan Kenobi and Princess Leia, his adoptive daughter. I like those little touches like that, and when you think about the bigger picture of the saga, that to me adds a little more depth to it. In that respect, I was okay with it. And then we get other characters like Darth Vader and Grand Moff Tarkin. We'll talk about Darth Vader in a second, but Grand Moff Tarkin, I expected him to be in this movie in some capacity before this movie came out, and I think I did hear at the time that he was officially confirmed to show up in here. I don't mind his role. His role is fine. I like seeing him taking away the Death Star from director Krennic. The problem I have with Governor Tarkin is his look. It's a motion capture effect. The effects look really, really, really off. And when you first see him from behind, it's like, oh man, it's Governor Tarkin. This is perfect. And maybe he could turn around and we could see his face from an angle or maybe from a distance or something like that and just keep it from the backside of his head and you could see his reflection. I would have been okay with that. But when he turns around and you see his face, this is how I reacted.
We've heard word of rumors circulating through the city. Apparently, you've lost a rather talkative cargo pilot.
There are a couple of shots where it does look legitimately real, but it doesn't really work though. Even watching this movie the other night, I was having a hard time paying attention to what he was saying because the CGI in full close-ups under certain types of lighting, it was noticeable and I couldn't really focus too good. It's not bad looking, but it's distracting. It gave off a PlayStation 3 kind of vibe, and that is not good. Even George Lucas, in Revenge of the Sith, knew to put Governor Tarkin at a distance, off to the side, in one shot, and have him walk off screen. And that was it. Granted, that was 2005, the technology was nowhere near the level of quality that it is right now, but still, George Lucas at least knew to keep that at a certain angle before you got too distracted by his CGI face. Let's talk about Saw Gerrera, played by Forrest Whitaker, an actor that I actually quite like. Again, not much character to him like the main ones. And Forrest Whitaker's performance, I can't tell if it's the worst or the best that I've ever seen. It's really odd and out there from all the other stuff that he's done before. All we get is hints of a backstory between him and Jyn Erso, and then when he finally sacrifices himself during the destruction of Jeddah, we don't really know that much about him, and I don't really feel anything for that character, even though he says, "Jyn, save the dream! Save the dream! Save the alliance!" Not to mention what he does in order to get the questions out of Bodhi, which we don't even know if he did, by the way. Instead of going in a similar vein of an intense interrogation scene like in the show 24 with Kiefer Sutherland, what they use to get the answers out of Bodhi is a mind-reading octopus. Where did that come from? Like, a mind-reading octopus? That's the best you could come up with. Seriously. It really boils down to this one point. Now, you all more than likely know what I'm talking about. The reshoots that were highly publicized a couple months before this film's release. When all that stuff started to come out, a lot of people were immediately worried about it. And me, at the time, I was going, whoa, 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 calm down. Maybe they have to fix a few things. Let's just wait for the movie to come out. But then on opening night, as the movie went on, I started to say, something doesn't feel right here. And I'm not the first person to say this, but when you go back and watch the trailers, there's a lot of cool shots in those trailers that are nowhere to be seen in this movie. Now, you see stuff like that happen before. There's like small moments and certain lines that show up in the trailers, and they're not quite as good in the movie, or they're not even in the movie to begin with. One of those things where it sounds or looks better in the trailers. I get all that. And you have to find something to get people's attention. It's all part of marketing. I get all that. But the reshoots, if you pay attention to the way a film is edited. Now, I'm not a film expert. I didn't go to film school. I have taken film studies classes, though. And I could tell that the reshoots really hurt this movie. I don't know why Lucasfilm decided to get their hands in there so much. Maybe they thought it was too risky, the direction that Gareth Edwards wanted to go in, or maybe they had something else in mind. I don't know. I wasn't there. I can't confirm it, but when you read all the stuff that was coming out and you put all the pieces together, I think it all starts to fall into place. Now, this is not a knock against any of the actors in this movie, because I'm sure that they were all really trying. And there's some really good performances in there, like Donnie Yen's character, who I think is a really likable presence. And K2SO by Alan Tudyk. He's really fun and sarcastic, but he doesn't really add a lot of emotional weight to the story either. But don't you find it interesting that this is not the first time Alan Tudyk has voiced a robot? And I'm not trying to badmouth Gareth Edwards, because having read some quotes that he said in certain interviews, it sounded like a really stressful production for him. I actually really appreciate the vision that he brings to Star Wars, like the sense of scale when you look up at the Death Star before you first see Governor Tarkin, seeing all the Star Destroyers coming out of the shadow of the Death Star, how big this whole thing is, the Death Star eclipse, which is one of the coolest images in the movie, by the way. The visual effects and production design, they're all very spot on. It looks and feels just exactly like the original trilogy, and it's visually rich as those three films, and The Force Awakens, and a little bit of what we've seen from the Mandalorian trailer. And from an action standpoint, the climactic battle above Scarif, the space battle, that is the best space battle in the franchise since the Endor battle in Return of the Jedi. And seeing the air and ground combat on the planet Scarif, that's all really cool, and it reminded me a lot of the Rogue Squadron games that I used to play as a kid, and the old school Battlefront games. And I hate to go back to the negatives here, but one of the biggest issues I have with this movie is because of the lack of characterization and poorly written story, there's a heavy dose of fan service in here. Now, I don't want to be one of those guys that says fan service is always bad and it should never be in a movie. I don't think this is the intention of the film anyway. But because of all the reshoots and how the plot is structured, certain characters that show up in here, like Bail Organa, General Don Donna, is that how you say it? I don't know. Mon Mothma, Governor Tarkin, Darth Vader, and I'll talk about somebody else here in a minute, but I get the impression that this movie's heavily relying on fan service and familiar imagery to make the fans go, hey, remember this from the original trilogy? Hey fans, you like this from the original trilogy? Here it is, love us guys, love us, love us! And people said that The Force Awakens did the exact same thing.
Force Awakens is a remake, Joe. Rogue One is a unique film that's...
I swear to God, these fans, they never let up. Now, since this is set during the original trilogy timeline, okay, I don't mind the Empire being there, I don't mind the Rebels being there, but don't put these two guys in here in the same place where that Death Star blows it up like 10 minutes later. Because of how quickly that happens, it makes me think they had to have left the planet immediately after that. They say the exact same thing to Jyn that they said to Luke in the original film.
I don't like you either. You just watch yourself. Hey! You just watch yourself. No.
Why are they there? And don't put 3PO and R2-D2 in the hangar bays of the Rebel base right before the fleet's about to take off. And don't put Princess Leia in the middle of the battlefield either. Which, since we talked about that, I remember this. I actually thought that the CGI face of Princess Leia looked good. What they should have done was just focus on the back of her head and then look out towards the window and see the reflection of her face in the mirror when she says ho. Don't show us the full face, especially when it looks that poorly done. Ugh. Something else that I forgot to mention, Mads Mikkelsen, who plays Galen Erso, he does a fairly good job in this movie, especially in the scene where we see the message, talking to Jyn about the exhaust port that he built into the Death Star. Jyn is watching it, almost breaking down in tears. That's the one scene in the movie where I genuinely feel a little bit of emotion. But that's all you really get. And by the time that Jyn and Cassian and all the others die in the explosion by the Death Star, I did not feel a single thing. And I judge myself for that because it's like, I should care about these people dying. But I don't, and that's not a good sign. And don't give me the excuse that they were written weak on purpose. They shouldn't have been written like that in the first place. If they were meant to make you care about their deaths, the writers needed to do a better job of that. But okay, we've held it off for long enough. You probably want to hear me talk about Darth Vader. He's only in there for 2 or 3 scenes. The first time we see him, where he's talking with director Krennic, who by the way, is fun at times, but isn't really given a whole lot to do. And then we see Krennic waiting for Darth Vader. When I saw this on opening night, me and my dad, and the people in the audience as we were watching this, the energy was through the roof. And then we get this line.
Be careful not to choke on your aspirations, Director.
That is so Darth Vader. And then we get to the scene that everybody likes to talk about with Rogue One. The scene where he shows up in the hallway, killing all the rebels to get the plans. That is absolutely terrifying. When I first saw this, my jaw hit the floor so hard. I know a lot of fans wanted to see him slice down a bunch of rebels in a similar vein that we see him do in the Battlefront games. Yeah, that's cool to see that, but for how the scene is constructed, I think it's amazing. That sense of tension that's built up, it's like, oh my god, how are they gonna get out of this? How are they gonna get out of this? Go, look at him go! Get out of there, get out of there, get out of there! Now, I know at times I sounded a bit negative during this review, but I really want to stress this. Rogue One is not a bad movie in my estimation. It's just not that good. My biggest problems were that I didn't really find the characters that interesting, and I found it just very underwhelming. There are moments of greatness in here, and regardless of its quality, there is some entertainment value that I can find in it. And if any of you guys out there like it, that's all well and good. And if you can't tell, yes, I have a Rogue One shirt on. And I own it because it's a Star Wars shirt, and I thought it looked cool. So those are my thoughts on Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. What are your guys' thoughts on it? Did you love it, like it, think it's alright, or do you hate it? Whatever the case is, comment below and tell me your thoughts on the movie. And the next movie I'll be talking about in this series is Star Wars The Last Jedi. Oh boy. I've got some things to say about that one. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all very soon.